Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Friday, October 22nd, 2021. And if you'd like additional weather information, you can go online, weather.gov/Alaska. Or if you have any interesting reports or images you wish to pass on to me, you can reach me at peter.chan@noaa.gov. Well, we've had a very powerful Bering low pressure system with hurricane force winds rake especially the eastern Aleutians into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. That system is emerging now into the southwest Gulf and will be weakening as it continues to work its way east-northeastward. Check out these peak wind gusts, 136 miles an hour near Nikolsky at White Alice Buoy. Dutch Harbor reported a peak wind gust of 132 miles an hour at the Dutch Harbor Spit. The airport, a peak wind of 83 miles an hour. And the strongest winds went through that area last night. And since then, the winds are coming down, and the hurricane force wind warning that was in effect has been allowed to expire after 4 p.m. this Friday afternoon. Overall, we are looking for cooler temperatures to prevail across the southern half of the state, with some additional precipitation, especially along the Gulf Coast and into the Panhandle as we close out the month of October and start November. But here are some images of the damage that occurred on Alaska Dutch Harbor areas. We have a picture there of a vehicle blown over as well as a trailer. There's also been reports of some damage to roofs and siding, and also communications being knocked out. But the good news is the winds, the most severe winds have passed and conditions are improving. So taking a look at the wind forecast for tonight, you can see a core of stronger winds departing the Unalaska area, the eastern Aleutians. There's still some stronger winds up there just off of the Panhandle. In fact, the southern part of the Panhandle had some wind gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour. There was a peak wind gust of 71 miles an hour at Cape Decision. But as we go into Saturday morning, you see that area of stronger core of winds rotating south of the land there in the northern Gulf, and that will be in the process of dissipating, but any flights that way definitely encounter some turbulence. And then off to the west, winds will continue to come down. Though it's still windy, the winds will continue to diminish there across the eastern Aleutians. And then finally, there could be a few, as we go through Saturday, there could be a few gustier winds, the eastern half of the Alaskan range, what we call the gap winds, with southerly winds maybe as high as 45 miles an hour. But you can see there across the northern Gulf, the winds have come down by Saturday afternoon, as well as there across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. So on the satellite imagery, you can see one system lifting northward through the Panhandle. And then we can, if we look out to the west there from the lower Bering, the eastern Aleutians, you can see kind of a little curl in the clouds. That's the primary disturbance that'll be the primary low that's emerging now into the southwestern Gulf south of Kodiak Island. Also to note, one of the reasons these winds were so powerful with this particular low was that aloft, the jet stream winds there at 30,000 feet were on the order of 180 knots. That's just over 200 miles an hour. So some of that momentum can be transported to the surface, especially on the backside of the low following the passage of an occluded front. We call these stinger jets. These jets can exceed 100-mile-per-hour winds. I've seen it happen even in the Great Lakes. So it's very impressive with the fall storms that we get this time of year. Also looking at the map across the northeast area up along the Brooks Range, Alcan border, there's also some areas of snow. And then on the backside, the circulation around this low is going to keep northerly winds, elevated surf potential there along St. Lawrence Island tonight into Saturday. And those north winds are going to draw down some colder air, eastern half of the Aleutian, or I should say the eastern half of the Bering. And that's just going to bring in a little colder air. This trend will continue as we go through the weekend. Notice the double barrel low, the primary low just south of Kodiak Island overnight, early Saturday morning, and that system will continue to fill and weaken in the Gulf as we go through Saturday. Areas of light snow flurries continuing across portions of the interior, especially along and north and west of the Yukon River. And then as we go into Sunday, there'll be another low scooting by there, the central eastern Aleutians, but it will not be nearly as strong as the more recent storm. In fact, that storm had central pressure down near 940 millibars Thursday night, so that's quite impressive. And as we look out toward the west, there is an area of low pressure there toward Kotzebue Sound, lower Chukchi Sea, and that's producing some areas of mainly light snow. Temperature forecast Saturday morning, be down in the lower mid-40s there in the Panhandle. Above freezing, Anchorage on over toward Cordova, 35, and 22 though at Glen Allen, McGrath down to 22. And then looking at the temperatures for Saturday afternoon, get readings back up low to mid 40s, many areas, especially along the coast, mid upper 40s in the Panhandle. And then for Sunday morning, we are looking for lows to get down into the 20s, especially west side of the Alaska Range and Copper River Basin. Otherwise, lows should generally still be above freezing out the Panhandle and from Anchorage southward through the Kenai and Kodiak Island. Sunday afternoon highs, again, generally will get back up above 40 degrees along south central coasts and into the Panhandle. Across the far north, lows will be in the teens and 20s, especially along the Brooks Range Arctic coast, and overall just below freezing. High temperatures will remain below freezing north of the Yukon River and generally near or just above that as we go south of the Yukon River to the Alaska Range. Sunday morning lows will generally again be in the teens and lower 20s across much of the region, slightly higher as you get out toward the lower Yukon Delta, 29 at Eamonnok. And then as we look at Sunday afternoon, temperatures should generally be back up around or just above freezing along and south of the Yukon River. To the north, the North Slope areas below freezing, upper teens to mid-20s to the Arctic coast. And then Saturday morning lows will be below freezing across the southwest interior. We're looking at Bethel 26, though readings will still remain above freezing as we extend out along the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. Saturday afternoon highs, 47 there at Kodiak. Readings generally in the 40s extending out there through the Aleutians, but only in the 30s, mid-30s or so across the interior. Sunday morning lows again will be generally below freezing across much of the southwest there, with the exception of the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, because that northerly flow of air is drawing down colder air on the backside of the low that's going to be sitting then in the Gulf and weakening. And then Sunday afternoon, temperatures will be hard-pressed to get more than a few degrees above freezing across the southwest interior, and generally lower to maybe mid-40s, the Alaska Peninsula and out through the Aleutians. The temperature forecast October 28th through November 1st, we're going to close out the month of October on a cooler note. The southwest, south central areas and the Panhandle, so no real change from the overall pattern. And we are looking for precipitation to average above normal because there'll be a couple more Gulf lows impact south central coast into the Panhandle, with perhaps precipitation averaging a bit below normal along and north of the Yukon River, central areas from the Alcan through the Seward Peninsula and into the lower Yukon Delta.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time now for the aviation weather segment of our show. And most importantly, if you are planning a flight Saturday into Sunday, we've had a powerhouse of a fall storm work its way across the eastern Aleutians into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, with low pressure emerging, a double barrel low pressure out over the Gulf for Saturday morning. Strongest center will be located southeast of Kodiak Island, with another one extending off toward the east-northeast. And as a result, we do expect IFR conditions along portions of the Gulf Coast, the southern two-thirds of the Panhandle, Prince William Sound back into the mouth of Cook Inlet, and then along portions of the Alaska Peninsula, as well as up along the Brooks Range, North Slope, Arctic coast. That'll be a persistent area of IFR conditions this weekend. Most importantly, though, in the wake of this intense low, we've had wind gusts as high as 115 miles an hour near Nikolsky there in the eastern Aleutians. So there's going to be a lot of issues with turbulence, low-level wind shear. I'll highlight that coming up here toward the end of this segment. Otherwise, IFR conditions will persist across the northern 2/3 of the Panhandle for Saturday afternoon, back toward Prince William Sound, the east side of the Kenai, northern Kodiak Island, north side of the Alaska Peninsula, and again up there along the north slope, Antarctic coast. And still there along the Arctic coast, we'll see some of that IFR conditions spreading down toward the Bering Strait and into St. Lawrence Island, while IFR conditions persist across portions of the north central Gulf, especially from Kodiak on up toward Homer, Seward, eastward to Yakutat. And then for Sunday afternoon, IFR conditions should relax a bit there across the Gulf, still persisting though along portions of the west arm of the Alaska Range. And as colder air is drawn in on northerly flow, we'll see IFR conditions along the northwest Arctic coast into the Seward Peninsula and the lower Yukon basin. So IFR conditions are anticipated to persist, especially on the north side of Anatuvik Pass, and MVFR conditions along the south side. Also, that'll be the case at Adigan, IFR on the north side northward and MVFR southward. As we go further south and west, west arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark, Merrill, MVFR becoming VFR. Generally, VFR conditions will persist across the central eastern Alaska Range, Rainy Pass, as well as Windy Pass, Isabel, and Mentastic, because we do tend to get a little ridge of high pressure set up on the north side of the Gulf low that will allow for some sinking motion and clearer skies. Tenedo will see MVFR conditions become VFR, and then look for Portage to remain in IFR conditions, especially the east entrance, Prince William Sound, whereas MVFR conditions will persist on the west side and west entrance. Chilkoot and White will see conditions deteriorating, going from MVFR in the morning to IFR by afternoon and certainly evening. Freezing levels are lowest across the central interior, down to around a couple thousand feet. And the surface freezing level Saturday morning could be as far south as, say, the Kenai Peninsula, just off the Gulf Coast and southwest coast. And a little higher up there, around 4,000 feet out there toward the southwest portion of the Panhandle. The greatest threat for icing on Saturday will be associated with the Gulf double barrel low pressure systems there between 6,000 and 14,000 feet. And that would be portions of the Panhandle extending back toward Prince William Sound, the east side of the Kenai, eastern Kodiak Island, as well as the lower portion of the Alaska Peninsula. And then out along the west coast, as the colder air, north winds being drawn down on the backside of low between 2,000 and 8,000 feet through the Bering Strait down along to the southwest coast. Upper level jet stream winds, we have an intense 185 knot jet core out of the northwest, located across and just south of the eastern Aleutians, with the primary low center circulation at 30,000 feet located out over the lower Gulf, with an area of high pressure located there between the Alaska Range and Yukon River. As we drop down to 9,000 feet in the mid-levels, we see that low pressure circulation, the main center there southeast of Kodiak Island, strong winds 45 to 50 knots there at 9,000 feet across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, back into the eastern Aleutians. And then as we come down to 3,000 feet, the low pressure circulation remains there southeast of Kodiak Island, with winds of 40 to 50 knots across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. That translates to isolated severe turbulence there between the Kenai and Kodiak Island and extending out into the eastern Aleutians.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So, how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies, maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So, tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So, then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So, it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So, let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 to 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations, and you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes, and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad. And this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch. And I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRa's. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoras.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRa's. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and now in the marine weather segment, we are looking first at the sea ice edge and the powerful lower Bering low that crossed through and really hammered the eastern Aleutians and the tip of the Alaska Peninsula with hurricane force winds is emerging now into the far northern Pacific and southwest portion of the Gulf of Alaska, and it will continue to slowly fill and weaken. But in the meantime, the backside circulation of this low is going to see northerly winds across much of the northwest and western coastline of Alaska. So that's going to draw down colder air from the north and allow the ice to continue to build. We're starting to see now some ice forming in through Kotzebue Sound and even down into Norton Sound. And so with this pattern, the ice will continue to grow the further along we get here, and we had a new month coming up rather shortly. November is not far away. Looking at winds, though, for Saturday, they also have come down. There were some wind gusts earlier last night and earlier today. Southern Panhandle, 60 to 70 miles an hour. That stronger core of winds is rotated off of the coast into the northern Gulf out over the open waters. Winds will be southeasterly as high as 20 knots, the lower half of the inner canals, and then 25 knots Craig to Sitka, but gale force winds 35, 45 knots as you get west of Gustavus on over toward Yakutat, and waves there as high as 25 to almost 30 feet. And then on Sunday, look for winds across the interior of the Panhandle out of the northeast and north. That'll allow for some clearing, and waves 4 to 7 feet. Easterly flow along the coast with waves generally running around 14 to 16 feet. On Saturday, look for the strongest winds, at least in the northern Gulf there, a core of winds upwards of 45 knot gales to storm force winds of 50 knots south there of Cordova, with waves as high as 30 feet or so in the 25 to 30 foot range. And then coming down there as we get toward the Cook Inlet there, winds will be out of the north upwards to 30 knots, still 40 knot gales off of Kodiak. And as we go into Sunday, winds will come down across the region as the low continues to weaken. Look for northeasterly winds across much of the northern Gulf at 15 to 20 knots, waves. Open waters generally around 11, 12 feet, 3 feet there at Prince William Sound, and generally 2 to 4 feet with variable to northeasterly winds in Cook Inlet. And then across the Alaska Peninsula, also the winds will be coming down, still though 35 to 40 knot gales, especially south of Kodiak Island back through Sandpoint, Cold Bay areas. Waves 16 to 18 feet offshore there on the North Pacific side, and as high as 20 feet there north of Cold Bay on the Bering side. And for Sunday, winds will turn more north-northwesterly, northerly 20 knots around Kodiak Island, and then northwesterly across the Alaska Peninsula at 25 to 30 knots. Waves 11 to 13 feet on the North Pacific side and 9 to 12 feet on the Bering side. And as we look at the Aleutian chain, 35 to 45 knot gales out of the northwest to start Saturday. They'll be lighter the further west you get, especially west of Adak, 15 to 20 knots, waves 7 to 8 feet there. And then as we go into Sunday, winds are going to turn a bit more toward the east, northeast and eastern half of the Aleutians, as we watch an area of low pressure passing just south of the eastern and central Aleutians. And then for Saturday, winds across the west and southwest coast will be out of the northwest. Highest winds just east of St. Paul and St. George, 35 knot gales, otherwise 25 to 30 knots, pretty common in the vicinity and off of Nunavik Island and south of St. Lawrence. And keep in mind, St. Lawrence will be some elevated surf with those northerly winds tonight into Saturday. And then across much of the southwest and west coast, winds will be out of the northwest, 20 to 25 knots on Sunday. Waves generally 6 to 9 feet out over the Bering. Westerly winds turning westerly there in through Norton Sound, 4-footers. And then along the Arctic coast, winds will generally be out of the north, though westerly at Kaktovik, westerly at 30 knots, north at 15 to 20 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Utqiagvik, and then also extending down through the lower Chukchi Sea, picking up to 25 knots with waves there of 6 to 8 feet. And then on Sunday, winds will be a little more westerly, especially Prudhoe Bay toward Kaktovik with 2 to 5 foot waves. And then across the lower Chukchi Sea, northeast to north winds from Point Lay down toward the Strait with waves of 4 to 6 feet.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.